Hello, and welcome to the Unit 5 virtual preview for 7th grade science. My name is Ann Lawrence, and I am the 7th grade science CTO. Let's get started. A majority of this unit, or the first half of this unit, really is all about how organisms in an ecosystem interact. And eventually what we want students to be able to see is that interaction and that the up and down of moving parts within a system is applicable to more than just different organisms in an ecosystem. For instance, on the screen right now I have words like assignment, director, dean of scholars, dean of instruction, teacher, classroom, pencil, student, managing director, and Yasmin. So from these words, the same kind of interactions that we see between organisms in an ecosystem can be seen here. So if we're thinking about what are my producers, or what are things that would be in the bottom of the food chain, it would be things like assignment and classroom and pencil. If we're thinking about primary consumers, or herbivores if you will, that would be all of the students at the school and maybe the teachers. That next rung up, that secondary consumers, possibly omnivores and or carnivores, all of those heterotrophs might be things like the director and the dean of students and the dean of instruction and all of those things. A step up from that, like our top carnivores, might be managing directors or Yasmin Bhatia herself. So in general, what I'm hoping that students get from this unit is that the interactions that we see at play in nature are also things that we kind of mirror in everyday life. So here's the agenda for this virtual unit preview. We're going to go over the priorities for CA number 3. I'm going to explain the order of objectives. I'm going to talk about main misconceptions that students have during this unit, talk about the project a little bit and other labs, and then the goals of end goals of Unit 5. Okay, so let's check out CA number 3. I pulled out all of the questions that relate to this unit. We can see up here, number 25, they need to be able to distinguish between primary and secondary succession in words. They need to be able to identify behaviors of plants and why that happens. They need to know about wilting and the different kinds of tropisms that occur within plants. They need to be able to check out different ecosystems and determine what will happen as a result of a particular organism decreasing or increasing. They need to be able to go from a list of eating patterns and make that into a food web, and be able to identify which direction the arrows go, who should have arrows, who shouldn't. At the bottom here we have some more things that involve the behavior of plants. More questions here. Again, we have another in words question about succession. Same thing for over here. Talking a little bit about microhabitats that I did not talk about very much in my previous years teaching this grade level. However, this year is going to have to make a special point for this particular question. Kids need to be super comfortable with the word biodiversity and sustainability, as we see down here in question 3. And again, they need to be able to look at pictorial representations of tropisms and identify why that might be happening, or questions that go along with those pictures. So Unit 5 plan looks like this. Our statement of inquiry is sustainability is dependent upon balance and limited change, which goes hand in hand with the project that we're going to do and some other activities in class. Speaking of our project, here we have criterion A and D evaluated on an ecosystem that they build out of parts that don't necessarily have to be traditional organisms, which I'll show an exemplar of. The goal here is that students will be creating a full food web and energy pyramid using organisms of their choosing. Those organisms do not have to be traditional. It could be things like fairy dust as the energy source, for instance. They're going to be a teacher, and they're trying to explain how organisms relate to one another to a first grader using this analogy. They will create a big poster at the end, and the criteria again that they need is under here. Here's the order of objectives. We start with a basic intro into ecology. I will say that students generally have a pretty good understanding of intro into ecology. However, the vocabulary definitely needs some brushing up. So if you feel like your students are really high achievers, then you could probably skip this first lesson and just put some of the practice problems as homework or something like that, or include those practice problems later into these lessons. I definitely, however, wouldn't skip food web and energy pyramids just to give them a refresher. They usually have a really good understanding of food chains, but not necessarily of food webs. They get a little overwhelmed. There's a quiz in the middle on the same day that we do an owl pellet dissection. I have included here a lab that is a little bit different than we've done in the past, or not a little different, it's actually completely new, that our curriculum coordinator wanted me to focus on biodiversity and how it relates to a couple of math terms that are super important in 7th grade, mean, median, mode, and range. They usually take TELPAS at some point during this unit. Something I want to make a special note is, since this unit is about ecology and plants, it is super important that our students actually plant a plant. It's not very expensive to get like bean seeds or find something that will grow quickly. A lot of our students, and it is truly surprising how many of our students have never planted a plant before and seen how it reacts to light or water, or what makes a plant grow, what makes it not grow. And a lot of the tropisms are a lot easier to explain when you have a real life plant right in front of you performing those exact tropisms. Common misconceptions. Students often will say, oh, this is a primary consumer. Primary, that means one, it must go on the first trophic level of an energy pyramid. However, the first thing that goes on a trophic level is actually autotrophs. So students often put the animals, or heterotrophs usually, on a trophic level underneath where it should be. Students really struggle with the difference between heterotroph, autotroph, consumer, and producer, and all the different kinds of heterotrophs. They have a general understanding of carnivore, omnivore, and decomposer and herbivore. However, they have a hard time when a organism has multiple classifications, like a heterotroph, a consumer, and a carnivore. They're confused on why it would get all three. Students really struggle with their words biodiversity, sustainability, and interactions. That entire lesson is really difficult for students because all those words are kind of relatively large, and they don't necessarily have a succinct, like really concrete meaning. It's kind of a conceptual thing. So students struggle with those words. So anytime you can expose them to those words and how they relate in other parts of the world or other parts of our existence here on Earth would be super helpful. And then lastly, students often think that food webs kind of run until the end. They don't really realize how it's cyclical and how decomposers come into play to recycle that matter to be reused at the bottom of the food chain. So let's talk about our project a little bit. The objectives: students will design a sustainable ecosystem using a diverse array of real or fictional organisms on construction paper. In order to show how these organisms relate and interact with one another, students will create a food web and an energy pyramid. Okay, so on the front of their project, they'll have their name, the name of their ecosystem. They'll have an energy pyramid in words and pictures, and a food web in words and pictures. On the back, they'll have their name again, what their ecosystem is called, a list of all the organisms that are included, and an answer key, which I'll get into a little bit later when we look at the exemplar. So here's the exemplar. On the left, we can see my food web. And again, I've chosen a whole bunch of various non-traditional organisms to relate to one another. So we can see, for instance, that we have the big bag wolf is eating babies. The babies are eating laughter, etc. And our energy source, rather than the sun, is sparkles. So this is an opportunity for students to get really creative and make make the content more tangible to them. Over here we have what I was calling earlier the answer key, which is a whole bunch of questions, and you can see this on the project document about like who are your carnivores, if you had less of your secondary consumer, number one, what would occur? So it kind of gives a little bit deeper analysis of whatever they have chosen to describe on the front. So let's talk about a shopping list. There is a lesson about dissecting owl pellets, if that interests you. Students really like it. I would suggest getting gloves and the owl pellets, dissection materials. You can use a paper plate if you don't have dissection trays. You can also use toothpicks and plastic forks and knives if you don't have other dissection tools. The second thing I have listed here is plants. Students definitely should plant a plant during this unit so they can feel more comfortable with the tropisms that they learn. The plant game is a kind of an elaborate game that we play, which I'll post my materials for also. It kind of helps students understand how plants take in information from, or take in precipitation, and then make determinations about whether to create sugar or to grow a leaf or to dig deeper roots. Basically, how plants allocate their resources during the plant game. For that, you'll need some kind of graduated cylinder, paper clips, and then some other things that you can just print. And then lastly is the biodiversity simulation. That is the one that I have a full AML on, investigation AML, and you can see the materials that you need are not anything super intense. It's just a bag full of carts that you've cut out. And lastly, talking about the end goals of Unit 5, it's imperative that our students are able to analyze pyramids and food webs with ease, that they can figure out who's going to increase if this person decreases. They need to be really comfortable with biodiversity and if it's good or bad, and how you increase it or decrease it, and then how it relates to sustainability. Succession, they should be able to order pictures. They should be able to describe what's going to happen next in the order of succession. They should be able to compare and contrast primary and secondary succession. And then lastly, they should be super comfortable with the traditional behavior of the plants, including all the tropisms, wilting, turgor pressure, etc. If you have any questions about this unit, I'd be super happy to answer them. Just email me at alawrence@uplifteducation.org. I look forward to getting some feedback and hearing how this unit went for you guys. Thank you.